Hi everyone and welcome to my Season 10 feedback video for Diablo 4. So it's been 3 weeks now, pretty much exactly, and tomorrow, as of the making of this video, we're also gonna get the huge announcements and PTR announcements and so on for Season 11. So I want to get my feedback out as well before that. I've been playing quite a lot this time around. I'm almost Paragon 300 on hardcore. I might as well be by the time this video goes out. And well, it's been something like 12 hours plus on average daily for 3 weeks. So yeah, I'm clocking in soon like 300 hours or so. Overall, I have to say Season 10 was really good. I think this is probably the best season we've actually had. And this is largely thanks to some of the kind of like behind the scene changes, I believe. And I will talk through that a little bit. But overall, I would rank Season 10 extremely high in the landscape of Diablo 4. I think my favorite is probably still the pre-season from launch, but I mean, nothing really beats the launch hype, I guess. And then, yeah, Season 2 was really good. Season 4 was really good. But yeah, Season 10 is actually quite up there, I gotta say. So I don't have that many negatives to say, but obviously there's always a lot of room for improvement and stuff that could have been done better. So I'm gonna go through that. Let's start with Infernal Hordes. So Infernal Hordes is kind of like the big reworked game mode of the season, and it didn't really feel like such a big rework after all. We had like 2 weeks of Soulspires still being terrible and even worse than before that people got really mad about and was finally fixed, but I think that fix came very late. It should have been a week 1 fix, not a week 2 fix or something like that, but okay. I do have to say now Infernal Hordes are kind of in a decent spot with like how the different boons balance against each other, so that is okay. But I did expect more from this rework. Most importantly, I think something that people were really excited about and that we didn't get back in Season 5, for example, were like the Tier 7s and Tier 8 modes that we had. Like then we had like Tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they told us that there would be something else coming that never came. And we were kind of expecting a little bit more as some sort of like challenge, like a, wave survival challenge mode system that many other RPGs also have, where it just kind of becomes harder and harder, and then eventually you get overwhelmed. Speaking of overwhelm, I guess Diablo 3 actually has a relatively like suitable mode here with the Echoing Nightmares, if you know that one, where instead of this 1 minute timer per wave, you just have tougher and tougher enemies spawning, and at some point you can't kill them anymore, and then the bar fills up with how many enemies are present, and if there's too many, you lose. So you could do something very similar with like an Infernal Hordes mode and slap a leaderboard on it, and people would love that, I think. So this is like something that is a bit of a miss, and that I would definitely expect to happen at some point in the future, especially once we actually have other leaderboards in the game already, which are being developed, I guess. So in that case, I do expect another update to Infernal Hordes somewhere down the line. But at the very least, I think the mode has been upgraded a little bit, with Bartok being a pretty cool new boss. Plus, the loot is much better. It definitely fits into the overall landscape of endgame systems in terms of like what are the rewards, what can you get there. So I think that Infernal Hordes update was relatively good, and it's definitely more fun than before. So that was fine, but I would still expect this at some point. Now let's talk about some of the seasonal stuff. Chaos Rifts. So this was definitely like a big highlight of the season, I think. Even though they are extremely simple, it was really fun to farm them. I think probably most people agree with this. Chaos Rifts were just really cool. You just walk up to them, you click them, some like pretty tough monsters like pop out. And in some cases they really wreck you. Like this is actually really cool, I think, that we have very rewarding and very dangerous monsters together. So I think that in general Blizzard has finally understood that you have to couple difficulty with rewards, and this is exactly what the Chaos Rifts do. So when you walk up to them at like level 10 or level 20 while leveling, you get absolutely demolished, and that is amazing, I think. Also like in hardcore, for example, like these things are actually challenging. We had also our hardcore event that's currently running, for example, like 2/3 of all the rips are just Chaos Rips. And this is more, like we need more of that stuff, basically. And there's like this open world farming with Hell Tides, which is a bit problematic with like the competition that there is between players, since they kind of like steal each other's Chaos Rifts, and it doesn't really work that well as kind of like a social feature. And then there's a Night Management grind, which you can do on your own, so you don't have any problems there. And both of these are very viable farms. In fact, so much so that they are probably a little bit too good when it comes to like just progressing a character through the entire season. But it's also like the new thing for this season, the Chaos Rifts, the Chaos items. It kind of makes sense that this is like a really valuable thing. So I don't really have a problem with that. But well, looking at the future, let's say, where we might get Chaos Rifts like as a permanent feature, which I think we really should, then Chaos Rift should not be like the non-plus ultra, like absolute insane farm for everything. And I think without the season reputation grind, for example, they would probably be just fine as kind of like this little extra that maybe sometimes you find in Hell Tides, maybe sometimes you get this Nightmare Dungeon sigil, and it gives you like a bunch of this random stuff. But yeah, overall, I think it's safe to say that Chaos Rifts need to stick around. They're just fun to do, and they felt rewarding every time you do it, and they are difficult. More than the other content that we have, which is important. So if difficulty and rewards need to kind of like scale up across the game in general, and this is one of the like steps in that direction. So in general, I think Blizzard has kind of shown that they are really bad at keeping the content that they've developed around for the game, and they just kind of like delete everything all the time. And hopefully they slowly learn that part as well, that we want to have this content stick around. And we want to put more stuff into our Nightmare Dungeons, and we want to have more stuff going on in our Hell Tide and so on. So let's see what happens. But yeah, I think Chaos Rifts definitely have to stick around, even without the Chaos items attached to that system. Then let's talk about some of the invisible changes. This is actually kind of like also one of the highlights of the season, I think. Something that we didn't really know going into the season, just because it was like, done behind the scenes, or it wasn't really something that you test on a PTR, because PTR is usually much more about build testing than it is about, like stuff like, okay, how fast can you farm this and that in this place and these kind of things, right? This is stuff that we just kind of like learn as the season progresses, especially if there were some invisible changes. And we had many of them. I think the biggest one, probably like the craziest, most impactful change that has happened in like the last year or so in this game was the duping fix. And there was no word about it. Like Blizzard was just silent. They just like, clandestinely fixed duping, and well, suddenly everyone is playing a completely different game, it turns out. So that is probably the craziest change that we've had, and I think has really shown a lot of people that it's actually really fun to not grind Belial 8 hours a day non-stop with infinite gold and infinite materials. So that is certainly something. And well, for me as a hardcore player, not too much has changed in that regard, because duping was not really a thing there. But I think for the softcore players, I did hear a lot of very positive feedback about not having to farm so many bosses, about that there's so much other content to do, the grind being much more satisfying and so on, when you're not just done with like everything basically on day 2. And well, that definitely helped, I think. So that was a huge thing, and let's hope that it's gonna stay this way. But if we have like a permanent no duping future for Diablo 4, I think that would be insane. And then we also have generally just the loot and mods changes, and that are like just like located in different places, and they've done like a lot of like changes to the mix of like rewards that you get in this place and in that place. And I do have to say, it feels really good these days to just kind of grind through the different systems. I've done just a little bit of everything every day basically. So every time there's like a 5 Grimfavor Whisper popping up, I go there like to a pit run, and then there's an Undercity popping up, then there's a boss, I do like a boss, and there's a Hell Tide, I go to the Hell Tide, and so on. So that feels really good, I think. And this is basically how I've played the entire season on all of my characters. I never really had these really long grind sessions of just this one thing, unless, there was no whispers available. And then, here and there I had like a half hour where there was just kind of like a downtime with that. And then I was just like, okay, I do like 10 pit runs now, or I do like 2 Undercity runs here, or I do like half an hour of bosses. And then I go back to doing like this whole cycle of, one thing here, one thing there. And that just feels really good. So overall, we have all this kind of content in the game, and up to now, most of it has been largely irrelevant thanks to this. And now that the duping doesn't exist anymore, suddenly there's so much stuff that just is a lot of fun. So outside of like the season theme being definitely on the better side, and some of the Chaos Rifts stuff I explained, for example, I think that this is actually the real highlight of season 10. This part here with just the overall gameplay loop. There's also this part here, I guess, that I just explained, where it's just so much fun to just blast through everything, progress a character, getting like those extra whisper turn-ins. We also had this like double whisper event, which made this really juicy, for example, and you could like giga grind your stuff like that. And that was just kind of feeling good. So I think that Blizzard is like finally getting it effectively with like, you know, we want to do not just bosses all day long. I think they understood that just farming bosses for the most part is boring. In fact, I would actually like to go further than where we are now. And I would like to see way fewer boss materials, but harder bosses and a lot more greater affix drops from those. So I really wouldn't mind if we get something like minus 90% boss mats from where we are now. And bosses have like 5 times the HP at least, but every drop is like a greater affix drop or something like that. So, you know, you can definitely do some cool stuff there where we have some, you know, more engaging, more challenging boss fights, especially in Torment 4, where builds don't just like walk in and one-tap them. One big problem that we have is that we have the Torment difficulty system, and when you are too weak to do Torment 4, well, you just go Torment 3 and just one-shot the boss anyway. So we never really get into like a scenario where we sometimes have a bit of like a challenging encounter against some of those tormented bosses. And I would really love to see the T4 bosses being rewarding and hard enough so that even very strong builds can't just blast them down in a few seconds. So that would be ideal for me because, well, if you have trouble, you can always go down in difficulty. But, you know, right now it's just not really rewarding enough to go to Torment 4 and struggle against the boss compared to just one-shotting them on Torment 3 or Torment 2 or whatever you can do with your character. So effectively, the bosses have to become more rare and more tanky, and the rewards have to scale up a lot between the Torment tiers. For example, maybe on Torment 1 it drops 1 item, and that is guaranteed 800 with at least 1 GA, and then Torment 2 it drops 2, and Torment 3 it drops 3, and Torment 4 it drops 4. So this will be like a somewhat appropriate scaling of the rewards, I think, where, okay, if you're struggling with T4 too much, you can still go into lower Torment, but right now you barely get really an upgrade from going to Torment 3 to Torment 4, but the bosses become so much harder, so that, okay, eventually you just one-tap them. But yeah, I would like to see a bigger incentive to go for the higher Torments, especially when it's still a bit of a struggle, and then this could be even more fun. And I think a lot of other systems have somewhat of a similar issue, where, well, we just become too strong too fast, and just blast through everything. There's like no real challenge involved. We get to Torment 4 really quickly. I guess this ties into the next point here with the progression. This season, for example, on Hardcore Solo Self-Found, it took my druid 6.5 hours to go from level 1 to Torment 4 farming mode. So that is ridiculously fast. Well, back in the day, we just leveled our characters for multiple days. And of course, many people don't want to go back to that, and that's okay. But 6.5 hours is definitely too fast for that. And the thing is that after that, there's not really, you know, much more to do, right? So of course I can still get stronger and then, you know, push higher in the pit and so on. But realistically, nothing really matters at that point. I'm already farming T4. There's not really any kind of juicing and like extra layers of difficulty I can add on top of my content. Besides maybe Chaos Rifts being, let's say, kind of comparable to like Torment 4.5, I guess. So if I want to farm those, I have to get a bit more strong, but that's about it. But we don't have, you know, really a lot of systems that allow us to go further than Torment 4. And this is also what I meant with, for example, the boss changes. You know, I would like to see just like harder bosses where we actually have some real pinnacle challenge. T4 Lilith is still somewhat tough, but people still walk in and you just won't tap her at some point anyway, so there's also not really much there in some cases, unless you have like a very big character or something. So yeah, in general, I would say the progression definitely has to slow down and the power levels have to come down a little bit, because I think we're just kind of way too OP compared to what the monsters actually throw at us. And yeah, it's kind of like shortcuts, the most fun part of the game in general. So I think leveling is not really as fun as it used to be pre-expansion. I think yeah, pre-expansion with the capstone dungeons and going to World Tier 3, World Tier 4, leveling was always the most fun part, at least for me. And that has kind of like taken a step back. And now we have the progression from like Torment 1 to Torment 4, which is like really amazing. But the problem is it's just like so fast. And these days, like I effectively just skip Torment 1 and 2 entirely. Then maybe I spend a little bit of time in Torment 3. And yeah, after a few hours, I'm in Torment 4. And that happens on like, you know, a season start with no twink items, no materials on anything. And that is definitely a bit of a miss. I think we need to spend a lot more time in the lower torments. and kind of like slowly progress up towards Torment 4 so that we actually kind of like feel our character growth and we feel this like increase in rewards that comes with the increase in difficulty, similar to what I mentioned here earlier, right? Where, you know, we have like pretty tough content and it is very rewarding and that is really fun. And we kind of like need more of that infused into like the overall game systems and the overall like progression speed. And then Torment 4 being like somewhat tough, but, you know, achievable for most of the builds, I think would be ideal. And right now we are way overshooting our character power of that, and that makes this part, which should be the most fun part of the entire game, just kind of like too boring, I think. Now let's talk about chaos items. So that is definitely also one of the highlights of the season. I think generally chaos items have been very positively received. I am more of a kind of like a naysayer, I gotta say. I do have some issues with chaos items, and I think they were really fun for one season, but I don't really want to see chaos items return exactly in that form forever, basically. So one core issue I have with chaos items is that kind of like ruin item identity. So, you know, when I look at a Goldstairs crown, I know, okay, this goes into my helm slot. And you know, these other 3-4 items that I care about also go in my helm slot, and I have to choose one of them. And having the forced choice between these items, I think is actually relatively good. And I know, okay, this is my helm slot, it will have this thing, and maybe I can put this other helm on, or maybe this helm. And I think this is actually a really good system. We have the aspects that are already basically chaos items in that sense, right? You can like move them around between slots, and you can put this thing here and this thing there. And this is the aspect system. And unique items, well, you just have to take what you get. This is the item, deal with it. And I kind of like that part about unique items, to be fair. It doesn't mean to say that I wouldn't love to see maybe a system like Legendary Potential from last Epoch or so make its way to Diablo 4. I think that would be amazing. And maybe some other sort of like unique item customization or crafting or something like that. But yeah, I think this is definitely one of the main problems I have with chaos items, that, you know, I look at a character and I don't actually understand what this guy is wearing, because all the chaos items look the same, and I have to hover over every item, and then I understand, okay, this, and then they're in different slots. And yeah, okay, I know everything by heart, but I don't like doing that. So this is like probably number one of that. And well, number two is also just like the power creep, I guess, right? It's just like every single armor item is just like another ×2 or ×3 multiplier for our damage, which is just ridiculous. And well, our power goes through the roof, and we have like people clearing pit 140 now, which is insane. And yeah, in general, it kind of like is like extremely imbalanced between the different builds and the different classes. Now, of course, this could be like changed with just choosing better items for this chaos item system, right? Like, we don't need to have a Rotting Lightbringer and a Rod of Kapaleke in that system. There could be like, you know, worse items for those classes, for example, so that it's like somewhat balanced between builds and the progression is somewhat comparable. So that is maybe an option here. And yeah, I'm not really sure what should happen with chaos items. Realistically, I don't expect chaos items to just come back as they are. I think if they are come back, then there definitely needs to be some sort of change to the system. So for example, one idea that I had that I would be able to live with would be something like a chaos amulet. So maybe once you are in Torment 4, you sometimes can very rarely find this chaos essence, and you can put that on any unique of your choice, and it transforms it into an amulet. And then you have exactly like now you have all the stats, but just on an amulet. And amulet is kind of like a very highly competitive slot where, you know, we have legendary amulets, we have the passes that can roll, you know, it's like a lot of power in an amulet. And I think that would be some sort of like an appropriate permanent feature that resembles chaos items, where you know, we still have like a really cool like endgame feature and some sort of like crafting and like player agency that is really missing from the current system, for example. That could be kind of fun. But yeah, realistically, chaos items as they are, I think long term will be just too frustrating. You know, I mentioned the item identity, which is a problem. Stash space is definitely a problem with that system. Also, just like the grind and the lack of agency and the huge RNG with that system is definitely a problem. I think what people are really looking for is kind of like this here. Like, yeah, grind is fine, but I guess it kind of becomes frustrating when you just grind and you get unlucky and there is no relief for bad RNG, there's no bad luck protection, there's no currency we can grind that helps us to like maybe eventually just get the item that we care about, or at least fill in the gaps, right? Like some builds actually have 5 chaos items equipped, and you just can't get the 5th one in exactly the right slot where you need it, and you can't play that build even after like 80 hours of grinding, which is just frustrating. So, you know, they didn't really build anything into the system, and at the very minimum, you would need something like that. And I think what people are really looking forward to is something like build transformation. So I think this is probably why Chaos Items are so well received, because we actually have something to work towards that is not just available from the start, from day one, you're blasting through the entire game. And okay, we can blast through the game even harder when we have this insane chaos setup. But for example, builds like Death Trap Rogue in the season, I think are, you know, hugely successful and something that the game needs a lot more of. Like a build that you just cannot play unless you actually have grinded the character for like, you know, 50 hours or maybe more in order to actually get all those pieces together, and suddenly you have this insane build that now works, and that feels really good. You know, something to like, you know, finally unlock as you have played through the season for a long time already. And I guess ideally Mythics would fill that role, but Mythics are just so achievable and so easily available, and don't really transform builds in the same way as Chaos Items do, where we have like a combo between new effects, and you know, we can play these evade, core skill, spirit bomb builds, and we can play the Death Trap Rogue and yeah, whatever. So there's like a bunch of other builds like that just suddenly unlock that don't exist before. And that is a really cool stuff here. So I think like the big learning to take away here from Chaos Items is that people want more grind and something to work towards, but we need some sort of agency and some sort of RNG relief. That could be through trades, that could be through some sort of crafting system, some sort of currency. There could be many solutions to that. And we also want more build transformation, where it's like, okay, now we have a build that is actually like a really late game build, something that people can like look forward to playing, to like eventually respec to, because it just doesn't exist before that. And that is also really fun. I don't think that Chaos Items as they are should just be that system. I would like to see another progression system that, you know, layers on top of what we have, for example, in order to fulfill this. But this is kind of the key takeaway, I think. And lastly, let's talk about Chaos Perks and class balance. So this is another part of the season theme. So we have a 3-part season theme, man. Incredible. Chaos Rifts, Chaos Items, and Chaos Perks. And I do have to say, I probably would have been happier if this part just did not exist. We have like the typical, like, you know, powers, season stuff again. This time it's called perks, I guess, because maybe Blizzard got tired of being memed on with their powers. So now we have perks, but realistically it's exactly the same thing. And they are completely cracked. They're completely imbalanced. Not just with like how powerful they are compared to what we had in the past, but also between the classes, between the builds. There's like a gross imbalance, I think. And that was definitely a miss. Like druids with overabundance, for example, is like the best example here, I guess. Mana Shield on Sorg is just, I think, bugged as far as I know, and just makes you immortal by itself. It is really fun stuff that they try to put in there. So I do appreciate the effort for trying to make something cool. So Mana Shield is definitely cool, and I would love to see an effect like that coming back. Something like Beast Cornered was definitely a miss, for example. I think a lot of people got very upset with Beast Cornered with the life drain and then the constant red flashing of your screen. Like every day I would get questions about this, like, hey, can I turn off this red flashing, and so on. So, you know, we kind of need to make sure that people don't get upset with stuff like this. And yeah, the idea was cool. The execution was very bad, I think, in some of those cases. Then we also had, for example, the rogues, where they tried to do like these multi-core skill builds and then just kind of gave up and just made it like a buff to everything, which was, yeah, kind of like a very sad thing to see, I guess, since I would love to see more of those multi-skill builds in the game. And we did have a bit of a potential there on the rogue. And then after PTR, the devs just gave up. Yeah, it's a bit sad to see. But yeah, overall, I gotta say, yeah, Chaos Perks, it's fun to get these kind of like powers and perks every season. And then they change builds a little bit. So you don't have to go and like, you know, make every build a little bit different, because you already have this layer of season power on top of it that does that for you, right? So we have 100 different endgame builds or something like that. And of course, we don't expect an update to every single one of those. Some of them are just good and we don't have to change them at all. But then the season thing comes in, and the guy that plays, you know, Flurry Rogue for the 10th season in a row is going to be happy, because there's going to be something new for them to try. So that is kind of like the main part that makes Chaos Perks good, or like these powers in general. But I think we already had this year. We don't really need another layer on top. I think we should just focus on trying to make one of them really good. I think chaos items were definitely the star of the show, and the perks were kind of whatever. They were just like random power creep in most cases. And in a season like Season 10, we would definitely get away without having this. And instead, I would really love to see like a bigger focus on, you know, making this system even better, just polishing this more, you know, polishing this more, polishing this more. And this is like rather where I would like to see the attention of the devs go a little bit more in that case. I think this was a bit like too much having this on top. And this brings me to the last point here, the class balance. So in terms of class balance, well, we do have a lot of valuable builds, but this is mostly a result of just everything being overpowered and everything just destroying Torrent 4, which, I mean, is a lot of fun, right? You can kind of just like load up even like the crappiest build and just blast through Torrent 4 in almost no time. So there's that, which is good. So it kind of like hides the fact that like the class balance is kind of bad, because Torrent 4 is such a low bar. And then you only have the pit where nothing really matters. Going to high tiers doesn't really matter. You just farm whatever tier you can farm, and that's it. And yeah, this kind of like hides the problem that we have with some classes being like ridiculously strong. Like Path Druid, for example. Like, why did it get a Rotting Lightbringer chaos item in the first place? I don't know. Why did it get overabundance? I don't know either. But it did. So this is like, yeah, a bit of a miss here, I gotta say. And I think the devs have not really paid enough attention to trying to give classes at least somewhat of a similar power progression with this new seasonal system. It seems like they just kind of like made the items, made the perks, and threw them in there without really caring about, okay, how does it actually affect the game? Like Polarize was already like second best build in the entire game or something like that in Season 9, for example. And well, now it is even further, basically, thanks to Rotting Lightbringer chaos item. So that's like my prime example here. And similar with other builds, right? Where like we had crazy builds from last season, and we have kind of like the same crazy builds again this season, and nothing has really changed too much. But yeah, at least we had a little more variety with, you know, some builds kind of like coming in, like, I don't know, Flurry Rogue, Dance on Ice Rogue, or, you know, Death Trap. And yeah, there's a lot of like builds like that that just suddenly are so strong thanks to some of the combinations that it kind of works out, and we have like a new meta. But in other classes, it has not really changed too much. So overall, I definitely like to see a bit of a better focus here. I guess combined with this part here, right, where like it just needs to be a better balance between the classes. Some of them are just too insane, but I guess overall people really love this like kind of like high power season that we had with Season 10. For me, it's just kind of a little bit weird that we had this kind of season now in like kind of like the middle of nowhere, where, you know, I would expect this as kind of like the send-off season before the expansion comes out, you know, before everything gets nerfed into the ground and we get the next stat squish, and we kind of like reset our expectations to a new level of difficulty and speed and so on. Like right now, it just kind of felt like, okay, we had like Season 6, Spiritborn was crazy. Season 7, everyone was crazy. Season 8, everything nerfed into the ground. Season 9, power goes up a little bit. And then Season 10, like completely wild, right? And now we get Season 11, and okay, we're gonna get the announcements very soon. But realistically, I expected this to be, you know, maybe something like, you know, the last season before the expansion, right? Where stuff just goes wild and people can do everything and nothing matters. And that's okay. Right now, it's just gonna be like some kind of this like middle of the expansion, like kind of like hard reset next season, I guess, where our pot of will definitely go down. It can only go one way from here because of how crazy all this stuff is. And yeah, people might not really like that. So it's just kind of like my thoughts here. But overall, I do have to say, Season 10 was very good. And yeah, it seems like the devs have finally understood a bunch of the kind of like core ARPG features that matter. So when it comes to like the Endgame Loop that I talked about earlier, I think that was very good. Like the, you know, build transformation, the grind, I think, you know, they kind of got it with what we need. And if like future seasons bring us more stuff like this, and some of the stuff is baked into the main game as well, then I think we're actually looking at a pretty bright future here. So for now, this is what I got here for my Season 10 feedback. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think, or if there's some topic I missed or something you really disagree with. There's definitely like time to give feedback now to the devs, so I'll be checking the comments. So just write whatever your thoughts. But otherwise, let's see what the new updates bring. So we're gonna have some pretty big news very soon. That's gonna be fun to look forward to. And I expect the hype will be relatively high in the next weeks to come. So let's see what will happen. Hope you enjoyed this. Like and subscribe for more. And I'll see you guys next time.